Well, good morning, everybody. The sun's finally out. It's been so foggy this morning as I head east to Trenton, Ontario to meet a good friend of mine who's buying his first snowmobile ever. So it's a used sled, so I told him I'd come along and have a look at it with him and see if he should buy it or not. So why don't you sit back, grab yourself something warm to drink, and enjoy Dino's Tinker Shed as he fights through Toronto traffic. It's nuts in here sometimes, but we're gonna get through it together. I'll see you in a minute. Well, here we are in Trenton. Now I've just got to find my buddy Mark. He's around here somewhere.
Continue on County Road 4 for 1.5 kilometers.
I guess I got to get over. There we go. Anyway, when I get there, we're going to have lunch, talk a little bit about meeting the people. They're bringing the sled, and this is something you can think about, is the sled's actually further east. It's from Kingston, I think. And they're bringing it west to meet us here in Trenton to help us out with fuel costs. Most snowmobile owners are going to help you out if you're buying a sled from them. It's a really good community. It's very much like the motorcycle community, but they're usually willing to help you out. And that's always a good sign too, because they have confidence in their sled, because they don't want to drag it down to you and then have you say, no, it's not a good sled. We're still going to be checking it out, but I tell you, it's a great, great thing when they help you out like this.
You've got a lot of followers, I noticed.
It's coming, it's building, yeah. I'm up around 2,400, I guess now. I'm not sure. It's coming.
It's good stuff.
It's good, oh yeah, I like it.
Stuff. Yes.
Thank you.
So in terms of gear,
Yeah.
can I
Get in there. There it is.
Let's do it for coffee.
Oh yeah.
That's a jam.
That's a good jam. Now, once Mark and I finished our breakfast burger and jams, we met with the seller at a neutral location. It was actually a church. She backed that thing in there like nothing and unloaded it right out onto the turf for us to take a look. Now, we spent well over 45 minutes poking and prodding and testing this thing, and she answered all of our questions directly and honestly. Now, we had no misgivings. This is a 17-year-old sled, and it had all of the wear that we expected. The front end needs some bushings and a couple ball joints. The carbides are worn out, and it probably needs a new drive belt. Though one thing that we weren't expecting was that the stator wasn't producing any power. So he used this to negotiate the price down a little bit. Now, the price of power sports today in 2022 is insane for used equipment. This thing's probably a $2,500 sled 2 years ago, and it's a $3,500 sled today. The prices are just incredible. But overall, it was a decent base for working on. We loaded it up and, ready to go. So, everybody, this is my friend Mark. Mark and I worked together for probably about 16 years, I think,
Yeah.
eh?
Yeah.
And he moved away up to Aurelia, Ontario, where he works for the township there.
Yep.
And now he's right in the middle of snowmobile country. I'm so envious, you have no idea. So what made you decide to buy a sled, Mark?
Oh, like you said, we're in the middle of snowmobile country. We live outside of the city of Aurelia, and there's trails just down the road from our house that connect all the way up through Bracebridge and up to Sudbury if we want. So it just seemed like a no-brainer.
Yeah, well, I told you when he moved, I said, you're going to want a sled.
Yeah.
And he went, no, I don't want a sled. But now he's got one. So, Mark, what did you buy here? Can you tell everybody what you purchased?
Yeah, it's a 2005 Ski Doo 500cc or something like that. GTX.
And how many snowmobiles have you owned before this?
I have owned 0, and that is why I can't tell you exactly what I bought, but I trust it because my good buddy Dino here knows a thing or two about sleds.
I'm not an expert, but I do like riding them. So this is a pretty typical example of a sled that's 17 years old. It has a few issues. A couple of the shocks are leaking. Those are going to have to be replaced. It looks like the carbides are pretty much gone, so we'll have to put carbides on it. The stator isn't charging either. So a stator's the biggest ticket item. It's about $250 for a stator, but that allowed Mark to go from 3,800 down to
35.
Yeah. So he used that as a little bit of a negotiation tactic. And the young lady who came here with her 2 kids was absolutely fantastic.
Oh,
eh?
she was great. She was straight up with her answers. She didn't beat around the bush about stuff, and you could tell she took care of her sled.
Yeah, and she rides a lot.
Yes.
It was great. She's originally from British Columbia, and she's been riding sleds since she was a little girl.
Yeah.
Her kids ride sleds. It just is really good. So over the next few weeks, I'm going to take this home with me, and I'm going to tune it up for you. I'll go over the clutches. You'll probably need a new drive belt just for peace of mind.
Yep.
So Mark's probably into another $400, maybe $500 in parts, and I'm going to do all that for nothing, which is great because I want to do it on the channel.
We'll see about that.
Well, we'll see about that. But if you were to buy a sled like this, you have to keep that in mind, that because it's kind of old, you're going to have to set some money aside for parts and that. But overall, Mark, I think you've bought yourself a fun sled here, and I like the fact it's a 2-up, that you and your wife and your kids are going to ride this too.
You bet.
It's great. Okay, well, I'm going to get this thing back to the Tinker Shed, and we'll start working on it.
Thanks,
all right,
Dino.
Mark. We'll see you later.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
See ya.
Okay, it's the next day, and in order to get Mark's snowmobile into the Tinker Shed, I have to move a lot of stuff. I need to move my DR, I need to move my snowmobile, and I need to move my quad that's in the trailer right now. So I got a lot of reorganizing to do, but hopefully by the end of it, I'll have his snowmobile in the Tinker Shed up on a stand. All right, let's get moving. When Ski Doo released its brand new 2003 Revolution chassis, or REV for short, it completely changed the direction of snowmobile development across the industry almost overnight. With its rider-forward ergonomics, a pyramidal frame design leading to a 600% increase in chassis stiffness, and futuristic styling, the REV was on a different level than anything else that the other 3 manufacturers had to offer. It put Ski Doo years ahead in the R&D department. Now, although some critics felt the new design would only be adopted by the most aggressive trail riders, expecting long mile riders to stick with the more traditional sled designs, the REV quickly proved them wrong, and only a few years later, most riders were opting for the new rider-forward style now being offered by just about all of the manufacturers. Of course, Ski Doo had been working on the REV design for years, and its REV chassis easily outperformed the competition both on the snow and on showroom floors for many, many years. Because of this, the REV chassis became one of the best used sleds to buy, with great aftermarket support and in many different flavors, from the pure trail weapons to mountain sleds to this 2-up GTX that you see here. There really is a REV for everyone. Okay, what exactly did Mark and I look at when he was inspecting, or we were inspecting, this sled? Well, there's a few things that you want to look at when you're inspecting a used snowmobile. There are probably 3 different criteria I would fit things into. There are deal breakers, so perhaps the engine doesn't have any compression, you can't get it to run at all, and you're suspicious because, the person that's selling it to you seems a little shady. There are things that maybe are unexpected. So this is a 17-year-old sled. We're expecting to have to do a little bit of work on this thing, even getting into the chassis a little bit with suspension, things like ball joints and that. But sometimes you come across things that you aren't expecting. In this case, we learned that the stator, the charging system, isn't working on the sled. The battery tested good, but When we fired it up and actually tested it again, there was no output from the stator. That was unexpected. And then there are things that are minor inconveniences. These are usually cosmetic, or there are things that maybe there's a wiring harness with a wire that's been cut that you need to solder that aren't really too huge. It could be things like, in this case, it needs new carbides, things you're expecting on a machine this old. Now again, this is 17 years old. Now Mark really wanted a sled like this because it was a little bit less expensive, it was within his budget, and it had a 2-up seat, which is something he wants to be able to ride with his wife and his family. 2-up seats, true 2-up sleds like this, are not as common as the sports models, but they tend to have more miles on them, but those miles usually are a little bit easier. So when we looked at this, the first thing that I did is I wanted to look at the tunnel. I wanted to make sure the tunnel was straight, the floorboards weren't bent and all knackered up, and that on the front end of the tunnel, you know, the nun wasn't bent. There wasn't anything in there that looked too out of place. Now this does have a little bit of a weird alignment issue here, but I have a feeling someone hasn't put this thing right back together. When I get the plastics off, we'll have a look, but when I initially looked underneath, the pyramidal frame under there all looks straight, and I can't see anything major bent on the tunnel itself. So that seems pretty good. We moved down to the front end here, where we actually inspected all of the suspension. Now, as expected, there is a little bit of slop in the A-arms. And the one thing that was a little bit disappointing was the lower ball joints are completely worn out on this thing. The uppers have a little bit of play in them, but I think they're okay. But because we're going to take the entire front end apart to do those lower ball joints, we're going to re-bush that upper suspension, all the control arms, just to tighten it up a little bit. Now we did take a look also at how the shocks fit within those A-arms. They should be pretty much centered and each side should be parallel, and these ones do look good, or should be not parallel, but they should be symmetrical, and these ones are. All of the parts are in place. They don't look like it's been catastrophically hit with anything. And as we move down the spindle, the ski bushings are okay. They could be changed out. Probably next year is probably time to do that. The ski itself is in good shape. There's no real major cracking. There's no chunks missing out of the skis, and the ski loops are in good shape and they're actually there. Again, the carbides on this thing are just about worn out. They did a lot of trail miles as a family, and I think even the young son there said, you know, well, you don't really need carbides if you're just riding on trails. So they probably were getting the maximum life out of the carbides, and they're done. They need new ones. The next thing that we did is we took a look under the hood. So we opened up all the panels, lifted up the front hood, took a look all around in there. There's a few dings and dents on the exhaust can, but it's mostly the heat shield. So I don't know if they just threw it around the shop or what was going on there, but sometimes things like that do happen. When we did fire the sled up, there didn't appear to be any leaking anywhere around there, which means that the can and the pipe probably don't have any pinholes in it yet. And the overall condition was reasonably clean. Not everybody is as obsessive as I am when it comes to cleaning, or my son-in-law, who's at another level above me. But there wasn't any coolant dripping down, sitting in the lower areas. I couldn't see any kind of leaking from any of the cylinder heads. When I opened up the coolant reservoir, it was just at the right level. The oil reservoir had oil in it. There wasn't a bunch of leaking, although it is a little bit moist around there. That's pretty typical, because when you fill these things up, oftentimes you do spill some stuff. Again, the battery tested good, stator not so good, but that's something we'll have to address. On the clutch side under the covers, the belt definitely was worn out, but that's something I told Mark he's probably going to want to buy a new one anyway. The clutches seem reasonably clean and they functioned. We did cycle them, And we got them into the shop here. After I got into the shop, I should say, I ran them a bit more, and they do cycle all the way through very, very well. Because the belt is so worn, engagement's a little bit abrupt on that, but I am going to pull the clutches apart, probably put new buttons in them. It's probably time. Clean everything up, and that should smooth that engagement right out, especially once a new belt's on there. It should work quite well. Now, there are a couple things that I missed when we were inspecting it. So, although we had the track off the ground and we were listening for bearing noise on the drive shaft up here, which sounded good, there were a few things that I missed. One is the speedometer's not working. And once I got it home and started looking around, there is a few things where it looks like they've been wiring things. It looks like maybe they've replaced the heated thumb on this. And there's an odd switch on the other side that I need to do a bit of research on. It's plugging into one of the relays. It's a momentary switch. I'm not exactly sure what's going on there, but that might be our problem up here with the speedometer. I wish she had told me that, because we asked about that kind of stuff, and maybe she forgot, maybe she never realized, or maybe they ride with a GPS on this sled and have never bothered to fix the speedometer. But I'm going to do my best to get this one working for Mark. As we moved back, we obviously took a look at the track and the skid frame. The skid frame itself looks good. There's no bends in it. It doesn't have an excessive amount of rust, especially on the torsion springs. The sliders looked relatively new, and in fact, when I moved them around, they felt like they had just been put on, because they actually moved a bit. They weren't packed up with sand and dirt that sometimes happens. So I have a feeling they were recently changed. The bogey wheels, the idler wheels in general, looked really good. There's no real missing chunks of rubber on any of the tires, although one of the larger 135 mil rear tires is starting to show some signs of delamination. All of the bearings seemed really good, and I think that'll probably get him through another season, unless he wants to upgrade and spend that money later on this year, but I think he's going to be good. One of the idler bearings sounds a little bit dry, so I'll pop the dust cap off, I'll pump it full of grease with a syringe, and put it all back together, and I'm sure it'll be fine for this season. The rear shock on the skid, however, is definitely worn out. It just seems to move too much. It doesn't seem to have any damping when you push down on the back of the sled, so that'll have to be changed, and probably we'll just go to an aftermarket shock on that, unless I can find a used one. But the shocks on the rear skids seem to be harder to find than the shocks on the front. They tend to be sold with the skid, not separately out of the skid, so probably the best is just a good aftermarket shock. Now, speaking of the front shocks, I have a feeling that they've been leaking a little bit, but not excessively. So when I do have the front suspension out, I'll take that shock apart and actually determine how much damping is in there and whether or not he needs to buy a new set. That'll be something that we'll take a look at later. Cosmetically, it's in reasonably good shape. There's a few things we can do to make it look a little bit better. The seat was in great shape. I've got the rear seat off of it right now. It's out in my trailer. But the one thing that was kind of weird about the cockpit is this little teeny bikini windshield here. It's funny that they put a sport windshield onto a GTX, which is a 2-up cruiser. And even the controls here usually have a cowling that goes around there, and the bars tend to sit a little bit further back. So someone's been monkeying around up here, and what I don't like is when they put this windshield on, they use just some generic fasteners that they farkled in there to hold this thing on. I don't like that. Mark's going to be looking for a new windshield, a high one to keep him warm. For now, we'll go with the Rad Racer Monster Energy Just Send It windshield, which just doesn't make any sense on a GTX. I just don't get it. Overall, the platform seems to be in good shape. As I get all the plastic off it and dig down a little bit deeper, I am sure there will be other things that are going to show their head. But for now, I think it's pretty good. Well, I guess that brings us to the end of today's episode, where I went out and helped a buddy of mine buy his first used snowmobile. Now, used snowmobiles, again, can be a lot of fun. They're a great learning experience. They can save you a bit of money, but the nice thing about it is it teaches you how these things actually work as you fix them. If you did enjoy today's video, by all means, please leave a comment down below. I would love to hear your experiences, both good and bad, buying used snowmobiles. Just about everybody that I know that's bought a used sled has a horror story of one that they bought and it turned out to be a nightmare. So by all means, leave a comment. If you really did enjoy this video and you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing and liking the video. This really does help YouTube determine if other people would be interested in this type of video content. So please help me out and help other people out too. For now, I'm going to start digging into this thing, and over the course of the next few weeks, I'll be releasing videos on specific repairs that are going to be done to this old Rev and this chassis. So if you're interested in that, you've got a few videos coming that you're probably going to want to watch. I think I'm going to start with the stator first to make sure I can get that charging system running, and then we'll move up onto the front end and get everything tightened up there. Until then, I'm Dino. You have yourself a great day, and I hope to see you soon back here at DinosTinkerShed. These old Revs really are a nice sled. Bye for now.